What if part of what we hear about Medjugorje was still hidden among the rocks? Have you ever experienced this? The feeling that something important is whispering just nearby, almost inaudible, like a wind passing through ancient cracks and leaving a call in the air? Today, I invite you to walk this corridor of mysteries and prophecies with an open heart. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the sound of the wind among the rocks, restrained footsteps, the silence that almost speaks. Stay with me until the end, because what you'll discover now may surprise you. When we speak of Medjugorje, we are not merely revisiting stories of apparitions, but touching on something alive, current, that continues to provoke conversion. Prayer and the search for peace. Some call them revelations, others prefer clues from heaven. And above all, there is that which many eagerly await, the 7 unrevealed messages, words that, according to tradition and testimonies, have not yet fully reached the public. Why do some messages seem to remain veiled? Are they protected by spiritual prudence? Or is it because each heart needs to mature before receiving certain truths? In times of noise and haste, Medjugorje insists on a simple path: prayer of the heart, purposeful fasting, reconciliation, faith that translates into concrete actions. Have you felt this call? The visionaries speak of peace and a return to the essential, and yet there is something in this story that provokes us to go beyond the obvious. Prophecies and mysteries are not an invitation to fear, but to calm discernment. In the light of the gospel and the wisdom of the church, between what has already been said and what remains silent, there is sacred ground, the space in which God educates the soul in the right time. And perhaps this is why the unrevealed messages are so intriguing, not out of idle curiosity, but because they herald a path of depth. Stay with me until the end, because today we will listen to these whispers with respect, serious investigation, and a heart willing to learn. The wind among the stones reminds us that heaven sometimes speaks softly so that we learn to listen. In Medjugorje, the request is disarmingly simple: pray, fast, forgive, return to the Eucharist, care for family, intercede for the church and the world. What if the 7 unrevealed messages were, in fact, 7 steps on the same path? 7 notes of an ancient melody, pointing to the same center, the conversion of the heart. What you'll discover now may surprise you, not because we're hunting for secrets, but because, by looking at the signs, perhaps we'll see a pattern that's always been there. Have you ever felt like God speaks to you between the lines? In a verse that finds you, in a long-delayed forgiveness that finally happens, in a peace that arrives quietly. This is how I invite you to listen, without worrying about dates, without rushing through details, with responsibility, prudence, and a thirst for truth. Among the stones of Medjugorje, there are voices that recall the essential, and it is in this essential that hope blossoms. Stay with me until the end, because throughout the video, I will reveal a single discovery, simple and concrete, that can reorganize the way you see these messages and how you live your faith in your daily life. Now take a deep breath. Let the wind calm your thoughts and come with me. Let's traverse, step by step, this terrain of silence and meaning, where every word spoken and every word yet unsaid points to something greater. The path begins here, and the next turn may be just the one you've been waiting for. And as we walk this subtle terrain between silence and meaning, I want to ask you for something that truly makes a difference. If this topic resonates with you, leave here in the comments what touched you most: a memory, a sincere question, a prayer experience, even a fear you're facing. When you write, it's not just a comment. It's like turning on a small light that helps others find their way. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this kind of content, people who perhaps need to hear a word of peace today. And if you feel like following me on this path of prophecies and mysteries lived with responsibility and an open heart. Like this video now and subscribe to the channel. It seems simple, I know, but every like and every subscription tells the algorithm that this message is worth sharing with those seeking hope, and this expands our circle of prayer, reflection, and encounter. So share your voice. It adds to mine and the voices of so many who also hear these whispers among the stones. Stay with me, because soon we'll delve deeper into the next step, and perhaps it's precisely there that you'll discover the missing piece in your own story of faith. Medjugorje is a small village in Bosnia and Herzegovina that, since the early 1980s, has become synonymous with a question that transcends borders. What if heaven is silently trying to educate us? To understand why this place resonates with so many people, it's worth imagining the scene unfiltered. Mountains rising like ancient watchtowers, simple roads, a sky that changes color throughout the day, and ordinary people searching for answers to their pain, decisions, and hopes. It's not a fantasy setting, it's a place of people with work, family, conflicts, and faith. And it was in this everyday life that reports of apparitions emerged, involving young visionaries who over time shared messages centered on prayer, conversion, fasting, reconciliation, and peace. So far, there are no special effects. There is a humble call, but one with a profound impact, because it touches on inner transformation and the mindset with which we traverse life's journey. When we speak of visionaries, we are not talking about distant characters or untouchable figures, but about people with stories, fears, and growing maturity. They recount encounters, describe spiritual content, and above all, insist on something that doesn't shine through to the hurried eye: perseverance. The thread that runs through these accounts runs through simple and challenging habits: praying with the heart when no one is looking, forgiving when it seems impractical, choosing the truth when the truth hurts. This discreet seam explains part of Medjugorje's magnetism. The focus is not on magical curiosity, but on revelations that call inward, to a backstage of the soul, where the direction of one's steps is decided. And it is precisely at this point that many wonder where the hidden truth lies and where the noise lies, because when it comes to prophecy, the line between wonder and conversion is delicate. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. There's a detail that often goes unnoticed. Every time spiritual messages emerge, the need for discernment arises. Discerning doesn't mean disbelieving on principle or swallowing everything without thinking. It means listening, comparing it with the gospel, verifying its fruits, and observing time. Time, in fact, is a demanding teacher. It reveals what is a flash in the pan and what is a constant ember. In Medjugorje, the invitation always seems the same, and precisely for this reason it provokes, if it's so simple: prayer, fasting, confession, Eucharist, peace. Why is it so difficult? Because these practices require silent decisions, ones that no one applauds, but which change the course of personal history. And when transformation happens within, the outside begins to gain clarity, as if life had a new focus. The question that emerges from this scenario is inevitable: why do so? Many people from different countries, ages, and backgrounds feel drawn to such a simple place. Part of the answer lies in the experience of personal impact. There are those who arrive with shattered hearts and find the strength to start over. There are those who seek meaning and discover direction. There are those who carry old guilt and find reconciliation. This is not cold statistics, it is narrative, it is a journey, and narratives have a power that logic alone cannot explain. When someone returns telling that prayer came to life, that forgiveness was finally possible, that peace appeared without spectacle, these small testimonies begin to circulate and form a mosaic of discrete revelations. They don't resolve all intellectual doubts, but they shed light on the practical effect. A changed heart is often the most convincing argument. Of course, alongside fervor, legitimate doubts arise. Skeptics and believers look at the same picture and see different angles. Some demand more objective proof. Others point to spiritual fruits that cannot be measured. This tension is healthy when it doesn't turn into a battle. It protects us from naivete and, at the same time, prevents a sterile coldness from suffocating what is alive. In this balance, religious prudence plays an important role. Observing, testing, monitoring, without rushing to stamp definitive labels. To outsiders, it may sound like a break. To those who follow closely, it sounds like care for what is sacred. Between impatience for answers and fear of moving forward, there is a middle path. And it is on this path that a mature mindset learns to walk. And where do the famous 7 unrevealed messages fit in? They touch on the most delicate point of our curiosity. The idea that there are still veiled contents awakens 2 very human impulses: fascination and anxiety. Fascination makes us imagine connections, draw maps, search for hidden codes. Anxiety pushes us to skip steps, as if the world's urgency required spoilers from heaven. But if we return to the essence of what Medjugorje has been asking for, conversion, prayer, fasting, reconciliation, the Eucharist, peace, we realize that the core of the path is already available. The 7 messages in this sense emphasize a reminder. Not everything important arrives at once. Sometimes heaven works like a craftsman, polishing patiently, preparing the heart to bear the light. What is too strong when it arrives early can blind. What arrives at the right time illuminates. For many, this "not yet" seems like a riddle. For others, it makes sense as a pedagogical tool. The process of spiritual maturation is very similar to that of any serious learning experience. First you practice the fundamentals, then maintain the rhythm, and only then tackle more demanding content. If someone tries to play a complex piece without knowing the basic chords, it becomes noise. Spiritually, something similar happens. Without a foundation of prayer, without reconciliation, without practical humility, any deeper message risks becoming groundless curiosity. And groundless curiosity doesn't transform. It only stirs things up for a while. When the foundation is firm, what once seemed impossible becomes achievable. And this changes concrete decisions, habits, relationships, priorities. That's why so many people talk about transformation and impact when they recount their time in Medjugorje. It's not a pretty idea. It's a realignment, of course. At the same time, it's important to recognize the human underpinnings of this story. Seers aren't machines. Communities have conflicts. Interpretations vary. Expectations rise and fall. This human side doesn't invalidate the search. It purifies it. Remember that behind every great spiritual narrative, there are people learning to deal with limits, with criticism, with the responsibility of not hurting the faith of those who trust, nor feeding the illusions of those who are already fragile. Prudence here isn't censorship. It's charity toward others and toward the message itself. And when prudence is combined with hope, a posture is born that keeps us standing, walking with lucidity and fervor, without naivete or cynicism, listening respectfully to the whisper of the wind among the stones. This balance also explains why Medjugorje mobilizes believers and skeptics alike. Some are moved by the testimony of renewed lives, others by the intellectual challenge of understanding complex phenomena. These 2 perspectives, when in dialogue, enrich the picture. And in a way, the unrevealed messages sit precisely on this border. They demand fidelity from the heart to the essential and honest investigation from the mind, free from sensationalism. What emerges from this is not a spectacle, but a maturity that learns to wait without passivity and to act without haste. This is where the word journey takes concrete form. small, consistent steps that, taken together, inaugurate a new path. When the dust of the discussion settles, what remains is the original invitation: to pray with truth, fast with purpose, reconcile with courage, return to the Eucharist with a hunger for God, work for peace beginning at home. This map is ancient and ever new. It doesn't depend on public certifications to begin making changes. It depends on a willing heart. And perhaps this is precisely what's disturbing. While we await clearer content about the 7 messages, life is already demanding answers here and now. Not theoretical answers, but decisions that reorganize priorities and rekindle hope. When this happens, we understand why so many people return from Medjugorje, speaking less of phenomena and more of fruits. Ultimately, the question that opened this section returns with new intensity. What is Medjugorje? It is a place, yes, but it is also a mirror. In it, each person perceives their own hunger for meaning, their own rhythm of prayer, their own wounds that call for reconciliation. And the visionaries. They are signs that point beyond themselves, reminding us that the source is greater. The 7 unrevealed messages, they become a reminder that truth loves its own time and does not impose itself behind closed doors. In light of this, an honest provocation remains that paves the way for the rest of this conversation. Why don't some messages reach the public? Comment: that makes sense to me. There are moments in spiritual history when silence is not absence, but protection. Sometimes what seems empty is actually a care for something sacred that is still maturing. Consider how often tradition recounts signs that needed time to be understood. Before a message blossoms into understanding, there is a period of protection, almost like winter storing the sap of trees for spring. This interval, which at first seems uncomfortable, can be the difference between a superficial impact and a real transformation of mindset. Silence here is not censorship, it is method. It prevents anxiety from distorting meaning, hasty interpretations, from confusing the path and the brilliance of the already, from imposing itself on the wisdom of the not yet. If we look at recognized apparitions, we find this pattern recurring. In diverse contexts with different cultures, languages, and eras, there is a common thread. Discernment requires time, verification, and patience with the behind the scenes. Not everything is revealed at once, and not everything that is said needs to be immediately published. The Church itself tends to move cautiously, observing fruits, listening to testimonies, cross-referencing information, and weighing pastoral effects. It is as if heaven speaks at 2 speeds. One speaks to the heart, intimately, inviting conversion. The other speaks to institutions, urging criteria, prudence, and firm steps. When these 2 dimensions collaborate, the journey gains coherence. When they clash, noise, misunderstandings, and projections emerge that make it more difficult to embrace the hidden truth that is often right there, unassuming. This logic of silence that screams is not exclusive to one place. In Fatima, for example, there were secrets kept, passages revealed at specific times, stages of interpretation. In Lourdes, the emphasis was not on a catalogue of novelties, but on the grace that flowed into ordinary life. In other settings, processes took years, sometimes decades, until clear recognition. The path is not standardized, but the attitude is repeated. Listen responsibly, test, wait, observe fruits, avoid the rush that demands answers as if demanding a service. It is a pedagogy of patience. And when patience is combined with concrete decisions, constant prayer, reconciliation, sobriety in words, humility in proclamation, something becomes palpable. The revelations cease to be spectacle and become nourishment. Connecting this to Medjugorje, it makes sense to wonder why certain messages circulate more freely while others remain in the shadows. It's not about hiding for the sake of hiding. It's about allowing the signs to mature without being captured by narratives that, while seductive, would produce more confusion than light. The Church's prudence here fulfills an authoritative role that protects the essential. If the purpose is to guide toward God, the form must favor encounter, not dispute. And on the side of the receiver, there is also a responsibility not to transform clues into decrees, not to infer calendars where there is an invitation to conversion, not to project expectations that carry more anxiety than faith. The maturation of the signs demands a kind of unglamorous courage, the courage to remain simple when curiosity calls for fireworks. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. There is a subtle law in the spiritual realm. When the message is greater than our capacity to integrate it, silence operates as a loving containment. It guards what is dense so that it is not trivialized. It is the opposite of conspiratorial secrecy. It is the pause that allows the seed to take root before sprouting into view. In Medjugorje, this may mean that certain content needs to find the right time, the appropriate language, the sensitivity of a willing people. And meanwhile, the core is already living among us. Prayer from the heart, fasting with meaning, the Eucharist that renews, reconciliation that mends bridges, peace that spreads first within the family and then into the world. The paradox is that amid the suspense of revelations, the practical map has never left the table. Silence screams precisely this: start with the essential. This approach hurts our modern rush. We're accustomed to notifications, spoilers, tell me now or I'll lose interest. In the realm of mystery, this logic doesn't work. Truth, when it arrives too soon, becomes noise. When it arrives in moderation, it becomes clarity. This is where our mindset needs a course adjustment. Instead of treating the sacred as content to be consumed, we treat it as a path to be inhabited. This adjustment changes decisions. How I pray, how I listen, how I speak about what I've heard. It also changes how we deal with disagreements. The honest skeptic has a seat at the table, as does the responsible devotee, and both can contribute to purging exaggerations, dismantling fantasies, and strengthening what is solid. When the community adopts this tacit pact, discernment ceases to be a battlefield and becomes a laboratory of fidelity. There's also a factor that's rarely discussed: the risk of community noise. A single misinterpreted sentence spreads faster than a well-written book. An assumption launched with theatrical confidence takes on the appearance of certainty. In these moments, prudent silence is an antidote to mass hysteria. It prevents every backstage story from becoming headline news, every hypothesis from becoming doctrine, every personal dream from being sold as a universal revelation. Far from cooling, this silence preserves the right fire, the one that warms the conscience, not the one that ignites relationships. Therefore, processes of serious discernment include, in addition to listening, restraint, the ability to say, "Not yet," "Not like this," "Not in that way." It may seem harsh, but it's a matter of caution. It's the protection of the message against the vanity of those who manipulate it and the fragility of those who receive it. When this dynamic is understood, Medjugorje appears less as a showcase of secrets and more as a training ground for the heart. Silence then becomes a discipline. I choose to remain silent so as not to contaminate. I choose to verify so as not to confuse. I choose to wait so as not to abort maturation. This discipline has a direct impact on life. It exchanges frenzy and for focus, anxiety for perseverance, empty curiosity for a healthy hunger for God. Gradually, the call for unprecedented revelations becomes another quest. How can I better live what I already know? And this shift changes everything because it disarms the expectation of spectacle and ignites a commitment to practice. the hidden truth ceases to be an intangible enigma and becomes a concrete, possible, everyday calling. Even so, the question lingers: when then should we speak? There are times when silence gives way, and what has been kept hidden can be communicated. Typically, this step comes after consistent signs of fruit, lasting conversions, healing relationships, inner peace that doesn't depend on circumstances, structures of charity that sustain themselves over time. When the foundation is firm, public communication ceases to be stressful and becomes a service. The focus is not on the messenger, but on the content, and the content in turn pushes toward God. This is a simple but powerful criterion. If, in the end, there remains more admiration for the bearer than love for what is announced, something has gone off track. Silence then serves as a calibrator. If fame grows faster than loyalty, it's time to take a step back. There is also the pastoral dimension. The church, responsible for watching over and accompanying, must consider not only what was said, but what causes when it is said. Communicating implies paying attention to contexts, words, and consequences. Sometimes, a truthful message delivered at the wrong time creates confusion. At other times, a simple word spoken wisely opens doors that decades of discourse have not opened. This reading of time and manner belongs to the art of discernment. It is not infallible, but it is necessary. And when the community understands this effort, even those who disagree can perceive the intention to protect the common good, avoid unnecessary wounds, and place charity above immediacy. It is not the quickest path, but it has been time and again the safest path. By situating Medjugorje within this larger map, the theme of unrevealed messages takes on less anxious and more realistic contours. The thirst for news becomes a thirst for holiness, and curiosity finds a broader channel, the entire journey of the soul. Silence ceases to be a wall and becomes a cloister where the word is worked like bread, kneaded, rested, baked, shared. This bread only satisfies hunger when it has consistency. And consistency is precisely what arises when haste doesn't burn through the stages. The maturation of the signs, therefore, is not a bureaucratic whim. It is the guarantee that the message is not lost in the froth of the moment. In the end, there remains the delicacy of a provisional conclusion, which concludes nothing but steadies our gaze. When silence screams, it is suggesting that we look more courageously at the essential that is within reach of our decisions today, the essential that reorders priorities, that clears our eyes to perceive God's presence in the intervals. And in light of this, the question returns with new depth, opening space for the next step in this journey. Why don't some messages reach the public? Write it down. I'm on this journey too. When we talk about 7 veiled messages, it's like opening an old chest found backstage at a chapel. You feel the weight of the wood in your hands, notice the scent of time, and know that inside lies something that cannot yet be fully revealed. This image helps understand why so many people refer to a closed box when commenting on what, according to local reports and traditions, has not yet been fully published. It's neither theater nor conspiracy. It's the awareness that certain words need the right season to blossom. And while the lid remains ajar, the weight itself becomes pedagogical, stirring our mindset, the way we organize daily decisions, the way we deal with the anxiety of revelations. The question isn't just what's been said, but why not yet, and the impact this not yet has on those who choose to walk seriously. The heart craves details, the head wants justifications, but there's a finer thread running through it all, fidelity to the essential, which doesn't depend on spoilers to produce transformation. If we approach with respect, we can sketch a treasure, map without trespassing on sacred ground. We won't invent content or feign confidences. Instead, we'll explore thematic possibilities that historically make sense when heaven educates the soul. Penance, conversion, time of grace, prayer, family, church, trials. Each of these words is a point on the map, and together they form a coherent path. Penance here isn't self-flagellation, it's cleansing our conscience, saying enough to the excuses that keep us stuck. Conversion isn't a magical, isolated moment. It's a process that reorganizes our priorities and touches on practice, schedules, habits, mood, and how we treat those who disagree with us. Time of grace is the season when the soil is softest, when the seed takes root more easily. It's not a trick, it's an invitation to accelerate goodness. Prayer is the breath of the journey. Without it, other words become theory. Family is the place of the first reconciliation, the school of small patiences. The church is both a home and a hospital, a space of healing and sending, where faith becomes concrete responsibility and service. Trials are the mountainous stretches, those that tire but open up views. When we align these points, the map shines, without needing to reveal anything that causes a stir. Perhaps the most uncomfortable question arises precisely here. If the core is so simple, why call them messages? Because sometimes heaven rearranges old truths with a new emphasis, like someone rearranging the furniture in a room to let in more light. Familiar words, penance, conversion, prayer, can take on a precise shape for our times, clearing away the dust of information, overload, and emotional fatigue. This has a direct impact on life. It changes the way we work, forgive, consume news, and silence our hearts before making big decisions. And when this impact becomes visible, curiosity about the unpublished subsides somewhat, because what is already public begins to circulate freely. Still, there is something legitimate in the question. What if their order also has meaning? What if the sequence suggests a pedagogical path, a kind of spiritual staircase in which each step prepares for the next? Imagine the order beginning with penance. First and foremost, a request for inner cleansing, a sweeping away of the excuses we've collected. Penance, in this sense, is not a performance. It is a hidden truth coming to the surface with gentleness and courage. From it springs conversion, which cannot exist without firm and repeated decisions, those unnoticed and that gradually shape a new character. Next would come the time of grace, a season in which doors seem to open with less friction because the soul is less burdened. Prayer then finds space and cadence. It is not just asking, it is listening, thanking, offering, cultivating presence. From prayer overflows care for the family, which ceases to be a stage and once again becomes a priority, a laboratory of forgiveness and daily patience. Then the church appears not as a distant institution, but as a concrete community with imperfect people who learn to walk together and heal together. And finally, trials enter not as punishment, but as a gymnasium where the muscles of faith are strengthened, where what has been planted withstands the wind. If the sequence is this, or a similar one, the meaning is not rigidly chronological, it is pedagogical. Each stage supports the next. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because order, if it exists, can be less of a list and more of a song. Sometimes the soul needs a measure of penance before enduring the highest note of trials. Other times, the trial appears first and pushes toward conversion in a way that theory never could. Those on the outside can look and see only a bunch of concepts. Those who live it perceive layer by layer, as if the words had volume. And that's why the closed box isn't a punishment. It prevents the anxiety of deciphering everything now from robbing us of the experience of maturing step by step. A new mindset is born when we accept that the secret, if there is one, serves less to inflate curiosity and more to hone fidelity. When we talk about penance and conversion, many think of a catalogue of prohibitions, but spiritual life is more surgical and generous. Penance can also mean breaking a habit that weighs us down, adjusting our sleep patterns to regain lucidity, filtering what enters through our eyes and ears so that our soul can breathe. Conversion can mean rethinking our time, organizing our day so that prayer isn't pushed to the sidelines. Time of grace can mean accepting God's visit precisely when everything seems out of place, recognizing the unexpected as an opportunity and not just an interruption. Prayer, when it becomes rhythm, gives rise to better choices almost without fanfare. Family, when it receives true attention and presence, becomes a shelter that heals memories and nurtures affections. Church, when lived as a body and not as a stage, restores to faith the taste of home. And trials, when endured meaningfully, cease to be mere stumbling blocks and become milestones on a journey that has direction. There is, in this design, a kind of engineering of the soul. It's not a magical algorithm, but coherence. It's as if each word has its own gravity. Penance pulls guilt toward the light. Conversion pulls dispersion toward focus. Time of grace pulls paralysis toward movement. Prayer pulls noise toward fertile silence. Family pulls the self toward the we. Church pulls improvisation toward commitment. Trials pull faith from theory toward life. When these gravitational fields align, transformation ceases to be a diffuse promise and begins to manifest itself in concrete terms. The difficult conversation that finally happens, the forgiveness that seemed impractical, the serenity that resurfaces amidst chaos. This is how a general vision becomes practical without us needing to violate the space of mystery. Another honest question is whether the suggested order, whatever it may be, would apply equally to everyone. Probably not. It could be that, for someone, trials were the beginning, the push that led to the church, that rekindled prayer, that opened the heart to a time of grace, and only then to lasting penance and conversion. Heaven has the delicacy to personalize roots, but even when doors open in different places, the interior of the house has the same core. That's why the overall vision matters. It prevents us from transforming a stretch of the road into a permanent home. Those who absolutize trials run the risk of confusing pain with destiny. Those who absolutize penance can dry up joy. Those who absolutize family forget about being sent forth. Those who absolutize the church can drift into bureaucracy. Those who absolutize prayer without conversion fall into spiritual anesthesia. The entire map protects against such exaggerations. It's understandable that the idea of messages not published in full provokes. There's a legitimate hunger for direction, especially in confusing times. But this hunger, when it finds the dish of the essential, stops seeking exotic seasonings and rediscovers the taste of everyday bread. And the daily bread of these 7 words is enough for years of inner work. Those who choose slowly realize that the joy isn't in knowing everything, but in living well what we already know. And curiously, it's precisely when we live that understanding deepens. The secret, if it exists, is less code and more path, less password and more discipline, less spectacle and more consistency. Still, the provocation remains. What if the order of these words also has meaning? What if the closed box is teaching us, by contrast, not to skip steps? If the first emphasis is on penance, perhaps it's to remind us that the ground needs to be cleared before building. If the focus is on conversion, perhaps it's to insist that true repentance requires a change of course. If the light falls on the time of grace, perhaps it's so that no one gives up before the fruitful season. If prayer comes to the center, perhaps it's to restore the source. If the family is emphasized, perhaps it's to heal the cradle of relationships. If the church is called, perhaps it's to reconnect body and mission. If trials conclude the sequence, perhaps it's because, in the end, tested faith is the one that endures. None of this requires voracious curiosity. It demands serene fidelity. What remains for us is the beautiful and demanding part, crossing the bridge between theory and life, between map and road. The overview of the 7 lines doesn't erase the mystery. It guides us within it. And as we walk, each one realizes that the true novelty lies not so much in hearing something new, but in experiencing something old with new depth. The closed box then loses its allure as a safe and gains the meaning of a sanctuary. It's not an object of display, it's a place of presence. Approaching it demands reverence, silence when necessary, sober words when the time is right, courage to sustain the essential when curiosity seeks shortcuts. If this reading ignites something within you, keep this simple yet complete map in your heart. It doesn't compete with the mystery, it accompanies you as the mystery works in silence. And as the steps become more firm, the question that haunts you begins to take on clearer contours without losing its delicacy. What if the command speaks precisely about the rhythm with which God educates the heart? Comment: that makes sense to me. When we listen calmly to the voices of the visionaries, without seeking headlines or forcing conclusions, we begin to perceive a constant thread that spans years and accents. The call to prayer from the heart. Fasting lived meaningfully, reconciliation as a concrete bridge between people, the Eucharist as a living center, and inner peace as a fruit, not a decoration. In public speeches, prudent and repeated over time, the tone is not one of spectacle, but of coherence. Shortcuts to happiness are not sold, rather, a re-education of the gaze is proposed. When someone says pray with your heart, they are revealing the hidden truth that prayer is not a checklist, but a bond. The invitation to fast, in turn, shifts the consumerist mindset toward freedom. Fasting is not punishment, it is training the inner self to say yes to what matters and no to what enslaves us. Reconciliation, so simple and so difficult, appears as a mature decision to interrupt the logic of revenge that wears down the soul. And when the Eucharist is remembered, it is not to compose a devotional display. It is to recenter the journey, as if the entire life needed to realign itself on the axis of a presence. From this springs peace, which is not the absence of conflict, but inner resilience, a way of remaining whole when everything around seems fractured. These clues, repeated unhurriedly, have an impact because they disarm our anxiety for new things and lay before us the map of the essential. The curious thing is that when we let the words settle, some keys begin to unlock others. Prayer of the heart doesn't mean constantly heightened emotions. It means a willingness to be present, to listen, to sustain the silence that reveals what was hidden behind the scenes of one's own conscience. Fasting ceases to be a decontextualized performance and becomes a spiritual, intelligent, and concrete strategy for creating inner space. Reconciliation ceases to be a slogan and becomes a persistent practice, even when the other person doesn't change. Eucharist ceases to be an automatic habit and returns to being an encounter that shifts priorities. Inner peace ceases to be an advertising promise and reveals itself as the ripe fruit of fidelity, not an instant gift. There's a transformation of mindset here. We exchange the expectation of pyrotechnic revelations for silent decisions that change the course of the week. If you observe closely, you'll notice that this set of points forms a virtuous circle. Prayer deepens fasting, which releases strength for reconciliation, which restores truth to relationships, which makes the Eucharist an even more luminous nourishment, which in turn multiplies peace, feeding back into prayer. It's not a magic formula, it's an ecology of the spirit. Prudent voices insist on this, not because it lacks substance, but because the foundation still needs to be incorporated by many. It's like learning to play an instrument. Before improvising, you need to master the beat. And while the urge to improvise cries out for new ideas, the rhythms return to the beat with loving patience, reminding us that freedom is born of discipline. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because behind every word there is a pedagogy of time. Public speeches are not loaded with dates, but with directions. When speaking of prayer of the heart, the direction is from theater to truth. When speaking of fasting, the direction is from dependence to freedom. When speaking of reconciliation, the direction is from pride to bridge. When speaking of the Eucharist, the direction is from ritual to encounter. When speaking of peace, the direction is from control to trust. This spiritual cartography does not depend on extraordinary events. It depends on everyday choices. And it is precisely in this everyday arena that grace operates most powerfully, adjusting a habit, creating a small space of silence, asking for forgiveness with humility, offering forgiveness without making a fuss, choosing words that do not inflame, rearranging time so that the essential is not always postponed. Some criticize the repetition of these emphases as if they lack novelty. But if we're honest, we'll see that the difficulty isn't the lack of content, but rather its fidelity. The challenge is to sustain in the body what the mind has already understood. That's why the voices of the seers sound like echoes, not to echo into the void, but so that the heart, upon hearing them again, perceives what it hasn't yet allowed itself to be converted. Each echo is a chance to deepen a decision. When we hear pray for the 20th time, perhaps it's the first time we respond with a true now. When they say fast again, perhaps it's the first week we choose a real break, without fanfare. When they repeat reconcile, perhaps it's the moment we finally make that connection we've postponed for months. Repetition, in this sense, isn't monotony. It's a hammer that adjusts the stone until it fits snugly in the construction. It's also important to note the tone. Prudent words don't scare, they summon. It's not, if you don't do it, all is lost. It's, do it, because it's possible and necessary. It's not a pedagogy of fear, it's a pedagogy of courage. Fear paralyzes, courage guides. And this makes a difference in how we face trials, doubts, and falls. No one makes it through the journey without stumbling, but courage reminds us that a fall doesn't need to define our identity. You are not your most recent mistake, you are your next decision, and the voices, aware of how fragile and proud we are, offer a lean and powerful path, little noise, much foundation. Simplicity that, when lived consistently, produces a robust inner architecture. In this context, the Eucharist as a center ceases to be merely a doctrinal point and becomes an experience that reorients. Some say, discreetly and firmly, that everything we ask for, prayer, fasting, reconciliation, peace, finds a beating heart in the Eucharist. This is no poetic exaggeration. It is a reading of life that arises from those who have experienced it. By relocating this center, other practices gain a why that sustains them. Fasting is no longer an athletic goal, it becomes an offering. Reconciliation ceases to be a diplomatic agreement. It becomes the restitution of wounded love. Prayer ceases to be an anxious monologue. It becomes a dialogue that creates a home. Peace, then, no longer depends on the absence of external conflicts, but on the presence that dwells within. It's curious how, based on these clues, the question about hidden contents begins to shift. It's not abandoned, but seen from a more mature perspective. The focus isn't on decoding every secret, but rather on preparing the heart to receive whatever comes without panicking, without inflating vanity, without distorting the message. Preparation is the key word. Preparation means reviewing one's mindset, trimming excesses, healing resentments, organizing time, prioritizing silence. Preparation is different from speculation. Speculation exhausts us. Preparation prepares us. And those who are ready don't need protagonism, they need fidelity. These voices also point to another danger: hasty translation. A phrase ripped out of context becomes a trigger for interpretations that have nothing to do with the core. Prudence, therefore, isn't just for the speaker, it's also for those who listen and pass it on. We are not neutral speakers. We carry our wounds, our preferences, our ideologies. Therefore, it makes sense to insist on criteria: coherence with the gospel, concrete results, the humility to adjust course when we realize we've distorted things. Humility, in fact, is the ground where words fall and bear fruit. Without it, everything becomes a dispute. With it, the ability to see the essential grows, even when the details are unclear. There is, finally, a community dimension to these paths. The prayer of the heart gains strength when it finds other hearts in tune. Fasting is better sustained when it becomes a culture of shared sobriety. Reconciliation flourishes when a community decides to talk less about itself and serve more. The Eucharist becomes a source that nourishes concrete projects of charity. Inner peace overflows into public gestures of peacemaking, from the tough conversation that avoided conflict to the choice not to fuel verbal wars on social media. When this begins to happen, the question of what do we still don't know loses its anxious tone and takes on a new dimension. What do we already know and haven't yet experienced? The answer to this second question often opens doors to deeper revelations, not because someone granted them out of merit, but because the heart has become capable of recognizing the right voice amidst so many voices. Deep down, what resonates is a return to God and patient inner preparation. It's not a one-week project, it's a journey, and a journey presupposes exhaustion, new beginnings, discrete discoveries, and falls that teach. The secret, if it exists, seems to lie less in new information and more in the willingness to sustain a path that transforms one's worldview from the inside out. Voices leave clues, like someone drawing arrows in the sand. The wind may erase them, but those who record them internally are not lost. And while some merely look at the drawing, others begin to walk in the indicated direction. When the stages align with these arrows, life changes texture. The same daily tasks become different, not because they become easy, but because they gain meaning. Routine becomes a training ground, relationships become a place of healing, work becomes a chance to offer something that doesn't end in itself. And in this environment, when new words emerge, published or still awaited, they find a prepared home, not a stage for vanity. The difference is stark. What could become a source of contention becomes a reason for conversion. What could generate division becomes a reason for unity. And it is from this maturity that true freedom is born, the kind that allows us to listen without despair, to hope without apathy, to act without fuss. If, along this path, a phrase sparked in you a genuine desire to reorganize priorities, hold onto that light. It's often the first step in a silent and profound shift. And as you walk, you may realize that the clues were clearer than they initially seemed, and that the return to God, so simple to say, requires precisely the inner preparation that the voices patiently repeat. Comment. That makes sense to me. Discerning, at its core, is learning to listen unhurriedly and respond without anxiety. When tradition and prophecy meet, our first temptation is to seek a secret key that decodes everything at once, as if the spiritual life were a combination lock. But the gospel returns us to the essential. Truth is recognized by its fruits. Where there is peace that matures, conversion that reorganizes priorities, humility that disarms pride, and obedience that preserves the common good, there the seed is good. This simple ruler romanticizes nothing, it measures. And measuring in this context is not reducing the mystery to numbers. It is asking whether what we hear makes us more whole, more patient, more capable of loving in practice. If the supposed revelation inflates vanity, leads to sterile disputes, fuels paralyzing fear, or tears apart communion on a whim, alarm bells ring. If, on the contrary, it reorients the mind toward mercy, strengthens hope, and moves the will toward concrete decisions of charity, there is coherence with the source. This path begins with a test of coherence with the gospel. It's not an academic test, it's vital. Does the message bring us closer to Christ or seduce us into the shadows of the extraordinary? Calls to prayer from the heart, meaningful fasting, persistent reconciliation, and the centrality of the Eucharist have an immediate kinship with what Jesus lived and taught. Meanwhile, easy promises of power, curiosities that transform God into a purveyor of spoilers, and agendas that dispense with the cross, however showy, end up creating noise. Tradition, when alive, acts as a guardrail on the bridge. It prevents curiosity from slipping. It doesn't stifle the newness of the Spirit, but rather provides a framework so that novelty doesn't become a flash in the pan. On the other hand, prophecy, when authentic, doesn't compete with tradition. It illuminates it, urging us to return to our sources and summoning us to walk with greater courage. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. There is a decisive point in discernment: time. The timing of revelations can be pedagogical because God educates the soul according to the rhythm of maturation, not the rhythm of anxiety. Think of the field that needs seasons. If you sow and expect a harvest the next day, you uproot the plant before it sprouts. Spiritually, it's similar. There are words that can only be received when an inner disposition has been cultivated. Humility, to not instrumentalize God; obedience, to not break communion; freedom, to not become addicted to signs. Therefore, the Church's prudence is not cold bureaucracy. It is charity in the form of caution. It observes fruits over time, listens to testimonies, compares them with the gospel, evaluates pastoral impacts, and waits for the moment when communicating will help more than confuse. This process does not transform the mystery into a control laboratory, but it prevents our projections from becoming doctrine. Humility here is more than a beautiful virtue. It is an objective criterion. Revelations that place the messenger at the center, that create a circle of adulation, that hijack the conscience of others in the name of inaccessible secrets, do not suit the face of Christ. Humility shifts the focus to God, accepts correction, endures silence when necessary, and is not impatient for the spotlight. Likewise, obedience is not about extinguishing intelligence. It is about choosing to remain within the protection of the ecclesiastical body, even when the will would prefer faster steps. By doing so, the entire flock is protected against brilliant shortcuts that end in a precipice. This obedience, when authentic, is free. It is not servility. It is love for the truth that knows itself to be greater than ourselves. The fruits are the patient confirmation of this journey. Peace is not emotional anesthesia. It is steadfastness of heart amidst waves. Conversion is not a Sunday shiver. It is a realignment of paths, priorities, habits, words, relationships. Where these fruits appear consistently, even when no one is filming, something from heaven has passed. This is why discreet testimonies carry more weight than noisy campaigns. In spiritual history, phenomena may attract, but it is silent fidelity that sustains. And when the fruits endure, they do not contradict each other over time. On the contrary, they deepen. A peace that was consolation yesterday becomes courage today. A reconciliation that was tentative yesterday becomes a lifestyle today. Fruit grows on a good tree without makeup. This process forces us to adjust our mindsets. We live in a climate of urgency where the hidden truth always seems just. A click away, and the temptation is to confuse speed with light. But authentic revelations aren't headlines. They're calls for transformation. They demand decisions, require discipline, and impact our schedules, our way of working, and our way of overcoming trials. And yes, this is more tiring than collecting new things. It's the good kind of fatigue of those who have trained in freedom. When the heart is educated in this rhythm, curiosity ceases to be addicted to behind-the-scenes details and begins to ask, what does this word ask of me now? How can my life become a place of confirmation and not contradiction of what I claim to believe? Along this same path, it's worth facing the ambivalence of signs. There are days when silence weighs heavily, and the question why returns with force. Why not say everything at once? Why hold back? Why wait? The most honest answer is perhaps this: because the soul is not a neutral vessel. It needs formation to welcome. Formation that involves detachment, healing vanities, reconciling wounds, learning an obedience that doesn't belittle us, but rather places us in the truth. Without this foundation, excess content becomes confusion. With this foundation, a minimal word has a gigantic impact. Divine pedagogy, in this sense, is an economy of light. It offers enough for today's step and asks that trust carry the rest. The Church's prudence, then, appears as a service of spiritual fatherhood and motherhood. It is not a distant entity that would authorize experiments, but a community that seeks to avoid pitfalls, emotional manipulation, economic manipulation, dangerous isolation, ego wars. Therefore, when the Church slows down, examines, and asks for time, it is caring for the health of the entire body. And when it recognizes, it opens paths for what began on the periphery of the world to strengthen the center of Christian life. Prayer, sacraments, charity, mission. This dialectic tires those in a hurry for results, but consoles those who love what is solid. Over time, even the impatient realize that haste exacts high interest. Communities that implode, words that age, poorly, wounds that could have been avoided. There's still a subtle point. Discernment doesn't mean killing the mystery. It means creating space for it to be fruitful. When we ask, is it from God, we should always add, and what does that ask of me? The first question protects the truth. The second protects responsibility. Without the second, the heart becomes a spectator, collecting religious news while life remains unchanged. Without the first, it becomes naivete, embracing every breath as if it were the breath of the Spirit. Together, they build a deeply rooted path. The foundation is the gospel, the walls are concrete charity, the roof is the hope that does not disappoint. In this scenario, the courage to say, I don't know yet, is a higher form of wisdom. Instead of filling the silence with assumptions, one chooses to inhabit it with prayer. Instead of filling gaps with theories, one decides to strengthen what is already clear. Our age, addicted to instant answers, finds this movement strange. But the saints throughout history have walked this path. They accepted not understanding everything without giving up on doing good now. And it is precisely in this space of fidelity that often the light grows within. Maturity then ceases to be the ability to collect explanations and becomes the art of sustaining hope with deeds. When finally, broader communication becomes opportune, it arrives as a service, not a spectacle. The words fit with what was already being experienced. The community recognizes itself in them. The fruits multiply without hysteria. Unity is strengthened. Recognition does not create reality. It only confirms it. This is a precious clue for our journey. Don't expect an external seal to replace your internal responsibility. The seal is important, of course, but it is your life that will determine whether the message was well received. And at this point, tradition and prophecy embrace. Tradition guarantees the route, prophecy accelerates the pace. When the mind tries, To reduce everything to a formula and the heart reaches out to touch what is not yet tangible, perhaps the most honest stance is this: to obey what has already been illuminated and serenely await the light for what has not yet been. This obedience does not push us into passivity. On the contrary, it sets us in motion, committed to daily life. The secret, if it exists, is not locked in an inaccessible vault. It is hidden in the persevering practice that transforms the invisible into gesture and the inaudible into testimony. And when testimony is consolidated, it becomes the language the world understands. This is the point at which tradition and prophecy cease to dispute territory and begin to form a single landscape. Tradition tells us where we came from, the contours of the path, the dangers already mapped, the possible oases. Prophecy points to where we need to go most urgently, reveals shadowy areas that require caution, and invites us to cross the desert with confidence. Between the two, the Spirit works not to entertain us, but to convert us. And conversion, as we know, is a long-term effort made of small bricks laid day after day. When we accept this rhythm, our hearts are pacified, and the rush for new things is reconfigured into a hunger for holiness. If up until now, something has changed your way of looking at God's signs, messages, and timing, keep this good feeling. It's often the beginning of a silent and consistent reorganization. And as it matures, the initial question takes on a new light: how to walk with prudence without losing the fire. Perhaps the answer lies in this alliance between simple criteria and daily courage, between fruits that confirm and patience that sustains, between obedience that protects and freedom that loves the truth. Comment: that makes sense to me. There are 3 points at which the heart stumbles when it approaches prophecies and mysteries: empty curiosity, paralyzing fear, and the rush for answers. They don't appear with glowing signs. They arrive discreetly, dressed in good intentions. Empty curiosity presents itself as a thirst for truth, but deep down it demands dates, codes, and details like someone collecting rare figurines. It seeks the sensation of the unprecedented, not transformation. Paralyzing fear dons the garb of prudence and whispers that it's safer to freeze than to walk. It points to possible dangers and forgets concrete hope. The rush for answers confuses. Speed with light. It seeks shortcuts, dispenses with silence, reduces the journey to a set of slogans, and loses the pedagogy of time. These 3 temptations drain energy, steal sobriety, and divert our gaze from the core. Returning to God, inner preparation, decisions that organize life. If we don't recognize them, they dominate the backstage of the soul and disguise faith as if it were a spectacle. Empty curiosity seems sophisticated, but it operates like a news addiction. It pushes us to seek the hidden truth of the day without asking what that truth demands of us. It's a consumption of signs. The more we consume, the more we miss and the less we practice. The mind thinks it's advanced because it's accumulated information. The heart, however, remains in the same place. The antidote begins when we replace data collection with a small, concrete, repeatable commitment, almost too humble to make headlines. A brief daily prayer, for example, has an impact we only realize over time. 5 minutes of real silence, a short reading of the gospel, a phrase we carry in our pocket throughout the day. It seems small, but it's like water dripping on a stone. It changes form, opens a passage. Curiosity demands more content. Prayer demands more presence. And presence is what converts what we hear into life. Paralyzing fear, in turn, changes the lens. Everything takes on the color of threat. It reads revelations as sentences and forgets that, in spiritual history, God's voice always opens paths, even when it corrects. Fear fixes its gaze on the worst case scenario, and in doing so, we sabotage our very capacity to love. It's not that fear has no facts to present. It selects only one side of the narrative, and in doing so, hijacks hope. The path out is not a theater of courage, it is training. A moderate fast, chosen wisely and purposefully without exaggeration, re-educates attachment and teaches that the soul can say no to compulsions. This seems irrelevant in the face of great threats, but it is precisely training that rebuilds freedom. By mastering small no's, we regain inner control and become able to respond with serenity to trials. The freedom that grows within restores color to things. Hope regains its footing. The rush for answers is seductive because it disguises itself as zeal. It claims that the world's urgency doesn't allow for waiting, and in doing so, it mixes truth and deception. There are real urgencies, but there's also the temptation to conclude before listening. Haste breeds simplifications, and simplifications in matters of the soul are costly. God's pedagogy is patient. It reveals enough for the next step and asks for trust for the rest. Trusting isn't about standing still, it's about acting within what has already been illuminated. Reconciliation enters here as a movement that slows the rush and reorganizes memory, asking forgiveness for a hasty word, restoring dignity to someone we label, ending a fight we've harbored in silence. These gestures seem off-topic, but they are precisely the core. When reconciliation occurs, the heart becomes capable of understanding what it previously only heard. Understanding grows alongside charity. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject because the three temptations, deep down, fight for the same territory, the place from which our decisions originate. Idle curiosity wants to rule the mind. Fear wants to occupy the heart. Haste wants to dominate the will. All of them shift focus from the essential and hijack the energy that should go to prayer, service, and fidelity in small matters. This is why the antidotes must be simple and persistent. Brief daily prayer, moderate fasting, reconciliation, and concrete charity. They bring the government of the interior back on track. No one becomes solid overnight, but those who maintain this regimen of the soul discover that anxiety diminishes, vision clears, and inner peace ceases to be a given and becomes a foundation. Concrete charity may seem the most social of these antidotes, but spiritually, it has a surgical effect. It prevents faith from becoming theory. The practical gesture, visiting someone forgotten, taking time to listen without correcting, preparing a meal for a family going through trials, discreetly offering to someone in need, fills the cracks through which haste and fear leak. Charity is a decision that deflates empty curiosity because it transforms the energy of knowing into the energy of serving. And it also serves as a test of authenticity. If our passion for mysteries doesn't lead to concrete love, something has fallen by the wayside. When love finds its footing, the heart becomes less vulnerable to rumors, less excitable by spiritual gossip, less prone to verbal warfare. Charity creates a climate where revelations, published or not, cease to be trophies and are once again called upon to love better. Perhaps you'll notice that these antidotes have a common design. They all shift responsibility inward. It's not an invitation to individualism, it's an invitation to maturity. We don't wait for someone out there to calm our fears, reconcile us, or pray for us. We recognize that the path involves daily choices, small, sometimes invisible, that alter our mindset. What seemed too big begins to lose power as the foundations are firmed. The hidden truth, then, lies not so much in secret agendas, but in the shift of axis, from spectacle to discipline, from noise to silence, from consumption to offering. This is how the journey gains depth, and the backstage of the soul becomes less vulnerable to manipulation. There's a point we almost never admit. Often our fascination with dates is an escape from the present. Searching for when can be a way of postponing how. The question, when will it come, frees us for a few minutes from the question, how will I live today? The same logic applies to haste. If I knew everything now, it would be easier to obey, when in fact it is today's obedience that trains our ears to recognize the right voice. Fear, in turn, also offers temporary relief. If everything is dangerous, then no one holds me accountable for decisions. It is in this tangle that prayer of the heart, moderate fasting, reconciliation, and concrete charity act as counter-habits. They disarm the escape circuit, opening a path of return. I return to center, accept today's step, do what good I can, silence the desire to control the invisible. Shortly thereafter, I realize something simple. Peace grows where before there was only noise. This doesn't erase the world's complexity, but it changes our attitude toward it. Those who have abandoned idle curiosity stop collecting news and begin collecting loyalties. Those who have overcome paralyzing fear learn to do good even when butterflies in their stomach. Those who have diffused the rush for answers gain the ability to read signs soberly without falling for hypnotic promises. The result isn't an unbeatable hero, it's an available disciple. And availability in the spiritual realm is gold. It allows the Spirit to guide without constantly breaking down our defenses. Life stops oscillating like a pendulum between euphoria and panic and begins to flow like a persistent river. It crosses rocks, bypasses obstacles, and reaches its destination in due time. A sign that we're on track is a shift in our inner vocabulary. Empty curiosity often says, I need to know. Hope says, I want to understand to love better. Fear says, there's no way. Faith responds, there's a possible step. Haste says, fix it now. Wisdom asks, what's the next faithful move? This shift is the result of practice, not chance. And like all serious practice, sometimes it's tiring, sometimes it's lazy, sometimes it seems futile. That's why it's important to maintain small anchors, schedules, rituals, discrete commitments with someone who helps us persevere when our willpower fails. It's not about militarizing the soul. It's just about giving it a skeleton so the heart has something to lean on when emotions waver. Within this framework, prophecies, both published and still veiled, cease to be a terrain for curiosity and become a space for conversion. When we hear pray, we no longer respond with theories, we respond with minutes. When we hear fast, we no longer ask, from what? But, from what do I need to free myself to love more fully? When we hear be reconciled, we no longer outsource the initiative, but rather seek out those we have hurt or who have hurt us. When we hear charity, we no longer see this as someone else's task, but rather as an opportunity to save someone's day. It is in this climate that fear loses strength and haste disarms. And it is in this climate, too, that curiosity transforms into loving attention. The only curiosity God seems to nurture. If we sustain this axis, a silent phenomenon occurs. Our inner self begins to recognize more clearly what comes from God and what is merely noise. Spiritual sensitivity, educated through practice, detects misalignments that previously went unnoticed. And when new words emerge, they will find within us a terrain less susceptible to fads and more open to fidelity. The impact of this appears, first in small places, in our patience with those around us, in the clarity of our gaze, in our way of managing time, and without warning widens the perimeter of peace. The exterior may not change immediately, but the trajectory changes within. And everything that changes within, sooner or later changes without. Ultimately, recognizing the three temptations and adopting practical antidotes is not an extra to the spiritual life. It is the journey itself, the heart that occupies itself with the essential becomes a habitable home for God and others. And when this home is standing, the anxiety to know everything loses its charm. What matters is remaining faithful to what has already been illuminated, making room for what is yet to come, and letting grace do its invisible work. In this spirit, mystery does not suffocate, it sustains. Hope does not deny trials, it learns to navigate them. And the journey, with its discreet background and its timely revelations, finds the rhythm that educates and saves. If any of this touched a real nerve in your experience, capture that spark before the day extinguishes it. Sometimes it's a phrase, an image, a pleasant nuisance. Carry it with you and observe how your steps respond. Faith grows like this, response after response, decision after decision, until the map of small fidelities reveals a larger picture than we imagined. Comment: this makes sense to me. If there's one thing these veiled messages have taught me, it's that the sacred often speaks softly and demands small but decisive steps. When the stone speaks to the heart, it's not to entertain us with mystery, it's to reorient our lives from within. And it's from within that the world changes color. We've become accustomed to seeking outward signs like someone collecting photographs, beautiful, striking, but still. What transforms us isn't the photo itself, it's the movement it provokes. Therefore, if there's a hidden truth here, it lies in the transition from emotion to action, from shivers to decision, from curiosity to fidelity. The path is modest and precisely for that reason powerful. 10 minutes of true silence, not the silence of a dark screen with our mind screaming inside, can alter our inner architecture more than hours of pious noise. In those 10 minutes, the dust of the day settles, thoughts find their place, and our breathing finds a rhythm we didn't know existed. It's like opening a window in a stuffy room. Air rushes in, and with it, the possibility of seeing clearly what moves us and what holds us back. The stone speaks in this space, and the heart finally listens. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because silence without purpose becomes just a pause. The purpose is to learn to recognize the right voice amidst the voices. It is at this point that the journey takes on practical form. A gesture of reconciliation made today with the exact person our pride insists on bypassing has a far greater spiritual impact than imagining grand missions that never come to fruition. Reconciliation restores the heart's freedom to love. It breaks the internal narrative that says I'm just defending my side and places facts back in the light of truth. From that point on, other words, prayer, fasting, Eucharist, peace cease to be concepts and become everyday matter. It's not a theory of forgiveness, it's a phone call. It's not a treatise on humility, it's an I'm sorry with a name and address. And when we take this step, we discover that the backstage of the soul reorganizes. Resentment loses its throne, memory breathes, hope finds a home again. The habit of daily spiritual reading, even a small one, is another golden thread in this fabric. The mind needs nourishment that isn't just news, just opinion, just distraction. 5 or 10 minutes with a passage from the gospel, with a psalm, with a good spiritual author who brings us back to the essential, act as a compass that realigns our mindset. The trick isn't quantity, it's frequency. It's allowing a phrase to work within us throughout the day, repeated in the grocery line, on the bus, between one task and another. Little by little, decisions that once stemmed from instinct begin to emerge from the light. Our temperament remains the same, our schedule remains full, our problems don't evaporate, but our perspective changes. And when our perspective changes, paths that once ended in walls begin to reveal small side doors. It's the discrete transformation that reconfigures the route without making a sound. For those just starting out and feeling intimidated by the gap between intention and practice, there's a simple and safe step, a rosary a week. not as a performance medal, but as training the heart to persevere. Repetition, which many despise, is precisely the pedagogy that consoles and strengthens. Mystery after mystery, the soul learns to breathe in time with something greater than its moods. And curiously, when someone sustains a rosary a week with honesty, they discover that the rest of the days also begin to ask for prayer, not out of obligation, but because it's needed. It's the thirst of one who has tasted good water. This step, so small in appearance, draws a furrow in life through which grace flows naturally. Between a 10-minute silence, a concrete reconciliation, a page read attentively, and a weekly rosary, something happens that no novelty alone can generate: coherence. Life begins to align itself internally, and suddenly, external signs take on meaning. The sunset that was once only beautiful becomes a sign of gratitude. The difficult news that once crushed becomes an occasion for intercession. The error we once justified becomes a real opportunity for conversion. In this coherence, inner peace appears not as a gentle emotion that visits when everything goes right, but as a muscle that sustains when everything goes wrong. And this peace is the language heaven uses to say, "I am here," without trumpets. Someone might say, "But I tried, and it didn't work." Here's a key we often forget. Constancy is the mother of the fruit. It's not the best day that determines the path, but fidelity through the middle and the worst. That's why it makes sense to protect these small habits with a minimum of strategy. Set a feasible time for silence and treat it as a commitment. Prepare the reading passage in advance so as not to waste energy in the moment searching for what to read. Honestly identify the person with whom reconciliation is urgent and transform this recognition into a gesture, not a mental speech. Choose a fixed day for the rosary, as if making an appointment. These simple decisions overcome the most common sabotage. I'll do it later. Later doesn't exist, it exists now. And the now, embraced humbly, multiplies the future. There's an emotional aspect that can't be ignored. Veiled messages stir us because they suggest something big is happening behind the scenes. Indeed it is, but the big almost always manifests itself in small ways. The mind, when seeking the extraordinary, tends to disregard the ordinary. The heart, when embracing the ordinary with love, realizes that it was the extraordinary in disguise. The silence of each day is the workshop where God adjusts gears. Reconciliation is the key that unlocks internal doors. Spiritual reading is the lamp in the hallway. The rosary is the rhythmic step that prevents distraction. Together, these gestures inoculate the soul against the anxiety for complete explanations and against the paralysis that fear instills. They create a fertile ground for revelations, when and if they come, to find a ready home rather than an exalted stage. And then there's the body, that often forgotten ally. Silence isn't just mental. It relaxes the shoulders, slows the pulse, and softens the breath. Reconciliation isn't just spiritual. It unties the stomach, loosens the jaw, and eases the weight on the back. Spiritual reading doesn't just nourish the mind, it adjusts the mood, gives a different flavor to speech, and limits exaggeration. The rosary, with its cadence, regulates distracted rhythms. Faith inhabits a body. If the body learns the path, faith encounters fewer obstacles. That's why these simple habits produce a cumulative impact. By integrating them, the whole person walks, not just a part. As this loving discipline takes hold, the questions that troubled us change tone. We remain curious, but curiosity is now a friend of hope. We remain attentive to signs, but attention is now a servant of charity. We remain desirous of light, but we know how to wait. And when a new story emerges, when someone shares something moving, when a clue appears, the heart that has trained itself in these habits does not panic or become an audience for spiritual gossip. It gathers, tests, prays, offers, and it follows. Follow is perhaps the most mature word here, because those who follow from within with constancy already inhabit the promise, even before seeing everything clearly. If you want to measure whether you're on track, don't count how much content you've consumed on the topic. Notice whether the moments of true silence have increased, whether the courage for reconciliation has become less rare, whether spiritual reading has left a phrase living within you, whether the rosary every week has been carving a path in your soul. These are indicators of transformation, not the day's mood swings. And if any of these points are still stuck, that's okay. Choose one and start there. The spiritual life isn't a performance contest, it's a school of patience. What matters is the next real step, the one you can take without pretense. Once that step is taken, grace takes care of the next. In the end, the secret of these veiled messages may be this: they call us to build from within the house where the Word of God can dwell when the time comes. And building from within takes longer, is quieter, is more humble, and infinitely more solid. When the stone speaks to the heart, it's not asking us to applaud the landscape. It's asking us to move, even if just a centimeter a day. It's this centimeter that decides destinies. It's this centimeter that, added to the centimeter of tomorrow and the one after that, rewrites memories, heals bonds, and opens horizons. And as this happens, the external signs cease to be ends and return to being what they always were: arrows. Arrows that point the way home. If anything here illuminated a concrete decision for today, a marked silence, a reconciliation initiated, a page set aside, a rosary scheduled, keep that light and hit the road. The journey doesn't require perfection, it requires honesty, and honesty sustained becomes wisdom. Write it down. I'm on this journey too. When we try to decant everything we've heard so far, a pattern begins to emerge behind the words, like an image slowly appearing in water. It's not a new revelation, but a responsible reading of the signs, done prudently, in tune with what we already know from the Gospel and the history of Medjugorje. Instead of promising what we haven't been given to say, let's organize the clues around a possible key content, a heart of meaning where the lines seem to converge. It's not about revealing secrets, but about perceiving coherences. And when coherence appears, the heart gains solid ground for decisions. It's as if heaven patiently repeats the same notes until the melody finally enters our body. And this melody has three movements that illuminate each other, like axes that structure the journey: the insistent return to the essential, the care for the home where faith learns to love, and the intercession that embraces the church and the world. No hidden codes, no hasty promises, only the hidden truth that practice makes visible, step by step. In what we call conversion, there's more than a generic repentance. Conversion is a re-education of our gaze and desires, a return to the essential that begins with the honest recognition of what leads us astray. When this word appears in the responsible voices linked to Medjugorje, it comes with two companions: confession and the Eucharist. It's as if the soul receives a hospitality script: open the windows, sweep the floor, turn on the light, and set the table. Confession opens and sweeps. The Eucharist lights and sets the table. In confession, our mindset shifts. We stop negotiating with what weakens us and choose to name the wound, bluntly, to receive healing. Those who have experienced it know the impact is tangible, not just emotional. The self-pity that justified everything loses its throne, and a simple but powerful freedom to say no to what seemed inevitable is born. In the Eucharist, the set table restores center. Life stops revolving around mood, agenda, and performance, and begins anew around a presence that nourishes and guides. There the heart learns to abide and to offer. And that's why, when they speak of conversion, Voices don't open a spreadsheet of new things. They point the way to perseverance. Transformation here isn't pyrotechnics, it's patient construction. And the more this foundation is solidified, the more the theme of Revelations loses its spectacle-like quality and once again becomes an invitation to live what has always been said more deeply. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because the second movement of this key content touches our most sensitive part, the family. If conversion reorganizes the interior, the family is the place where this reorganization takes shape, where decisions cease to be private intentions and become shared bread. Forgiveness is spoken of not as a romanticization of suffering, but as the persistent work of cleaning the water we drink every day. Forgiveness is not forgetting what hurt. It is preventing pain from governing the future. In many narratives linked to Medjugorje, forgiveness reappears as a key that opens doors that have been stuck for years. And when that door moves, the entire environment breathes. Alongside forgiveness, the protection of children emerges not as an ideological agenda, but as a concrete responsibility, creating a climate of truth and affection where children and the vulnerable can grow without carrying the debris of our adult wars. This requires decisions that disrupt routine, less shouting, less irony, fewer screens as nannies of the soul, more presence, more eye contact, more simple rituals that weave memories. And in dark days, faithfulness in trials emerges as a subtle yet revolutionary courage, staying when temptation calls for flight, talking when silence is the urge, asking for help when pride demands proof of self-sufficiency. None of this makes headlines, but this is where the gospel becomes flesh. And when the family becomes this laboratory of reconciliation and care, outward signs cease to be trophies and become fuel for charity. What was once curiosity about what will happen transforms into availability for what I can offer. At this point, the third movement, church and world, ceases to be an abstraction and becomes a natural continuation of the first two. Those who return to the essentials and tend to the home from within inevitably enlarge their hearts. The prayer for peace ceases to be a pretty phrase in difficult times and becomes a daily practice, insisting on behalf of peoples at war, wounded cities, neighbors in conflict, and seeking peace within our personal borders. The peace we ask for becomes the peace we try to practice. Less fuel in sterile arguments, more bridges in difficult conversations, more readiness to be the first to yield when yielding saves the relationship. Fasting for pastors here assumes a rarely understood spiritual intelligence. One does not fast for showy asceticism, one fasts to sustain those who bear the burden of service, so that those who guide do not lack lucidity, courage, and purity. It is a silent gesture that protects the behind the scenes of pastoral care, so attacked from without and so demanding from within. And reparation, an ancient word that gains currency, is the movement of loving where love has been denied. Small sacrifices offered by those who have been hurt by the church, by victims of abuse, by those who have lost their faith under the weight of scandals, by divisions that tear the fabric of communion. It is not a theater of guilt. It is a humble intercession that mends what has been torn. When a community learns this threefold principle, peace, fasting for the pastors, reparation, the landscape changes. Not immediately, not with fireworks, but steadily. The spiritual atmosphere clears, and little by little, the world around them realizes that something different is happening there. Wounded people who do not hurt back, weary people who do not give up on serving, lucid people who do not give in to cynicism. If this is the key content that makes sense given what we know, why do so many of us still treat it as too basic? Perhaps because our mindset, accustomed to stimuli, seeks shortcuts. The essential seems insignificant when the heart is addicted to novelty. But it is precisely in the essential that the axes meet and are strengthened. Conversion that doesn't overflow into the family becomes domestic moralism. A family that doesn't open itself to the church and the world becomes an emotional bubble. Intercession for the church and the world that isn't born from conversion and from the home becomes tired activism. The balance between these three movements is what transforms the map into a road. And that's why, when speaking responsibly, prudent voices don't provide calendars, they provide coordinates. They don't set dates, they set directions. They don't record spoilers, they ask for preparation. The hidden truth, when it appears, doesn't humiliate those who didn't yet know. It confirms those who were already walking. And preparing in this context is caring for these three areas, like tending a fire: the right kindling, the right amount of breath, patience with the embers. In this logic, revelations, when they arrive in their own time, don't seem strange. On the contrary, they fit into the lives of those who were already living. It's like recognizing the voice of someone you love when you hear two words in a crowd. You don't need to explain to anyone how you knew. You know because you've lived with them. Living with the essential is what creates this sensitivity. And this is where the Church's prudence, so often misinterpreted, shows its wisdom. It prioritizes fruits over time, looking at these three axes as indicators of health. Where there is confession and the Eucharist sustaining true conversion, where there is forgiveness and fidelity nourishing the family, and where there is prayer for peace, fasting for pastors, and reparation as a habit, there the possibility of deception diminishes and the possibility of lasting grace increases. Prudence in this sense is not ice, it is guard. It guards against manipulation, against vanity, against the temptation to use God as a ready-made answer to complex problems. And at the same time, it protects the breath of the Spirit so that it doesn't dissipate into fireworks. Someone might ask, so where are the new things then? The answer may sound frustrating, but it is liberating. The new thing lies in living. Anew what has always been called for, the return to the essentials, the home converted into shelter, and the intercession that embraces the church and the world seen from the outside seem like the same old thing. Lived from within, they are an earthquake. It's as if the ground shifted just a centimeter, but that centimeter in the right place altered the course of the river. The impact appears in concrete choices. In the schedule that makes room for regular confession and Mass, in the conversation that disarms a long-held resentment, in the anonymous envelope that discreetly supports a charitable work, in the fasting shift offered by a priest you don't even know, in the decision not to respond to slander. These are small levers that move heavy structures. Therefore, when someone lives this key content, they don't need a stage to prove anything. Life itself confirms it. And from confirmation to confirmation, the community grows thicker, better withstanding the storms and making the words conversion, family, and church and world less abstract and more tangible. The most beautiful thing is to see how one axis feeds the other when one weakens. On dry days, when conversion seems weary, family can support with rituals of affection and patience. On days of domestic conflict, the Eucharist and confession bring back order and remembrance of the essential. On days when the church and the world seem too heavy a burden, prayer in the home and moderate fasting restore focus and humility. It is an ecology of grace. In this ecology, no one carries everything alone, and the flaws of one place do not become an excuse to give up on the whole. The journey continues, and each step taken with honesty is worth more than 1,000 theories. Our gaze becomes clearer, our voice less harsh, our hands more available. And this, in itself, is already a powerful answer to the questions that brought us here. If this key content seems simple, it's because God's wisdom likes to hide in small things. The extraordinary, when it happens, is service, not spectacle. And if there is a possible map for navigating the time of waiting and questioning, it passes through these three mutually illuminating movements. Converted to the essential, reconciled and faithful within the home, and attentive intercessors. For the church and the world, we become the place where God's will can safely abide. The rest, when it comes, will find a ready shelter. Comment: that makes sense to me. We've reached the point where everything that seemed fragmented begins to align, as if the landscape itself wanted to tell us, after all, where to look. The promise I made at the beginning to offer a simple and transformative discovery is not a secret code hidden behind 7 doors, nor a mysterious key held by a few. It is a principle that, when it sinks into the heart, silently rearranges the entire house. The secret is not a riddle for the mind, but a call for the heart to return to its first love. That's it. Not to romanticize faith, but to reposition every practice, every sign, every expectation on the axis of a living relationship. When this principle enters, everything takes on new meaning. Conversion ceases to be a fear of punishment and becomes a longing for home. The family ceases to be a battlefield and returns to being a table where one learns to love. The church and the world cease to be the others and become the concrete space in which charity must find form. You might notice that since the beginning of this journey, words have been circling around a single center. What seemed veiled was, in a way, a shyness about stating the obvious, which haste and noise have erased. Without first love, even the best disciplines become burdensome. With first love, even the most discreet renunciations flourish. And first love here isn't nostalgia for a time that won't return. It's reclaiming the source that sustains today. It's remembering why we began, who we belong to, what moves us when no one is looking. It's from there that come the courage to ask for forgiveness, the patience to wait, the freedom to not compete, the desire to serve. When the heart returns, the mind finds its place. When the mind rests, decisions become clear. When decisions align, life creates a path. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this phrase, returning to first love, risks becoming a catchphrase if we don't translate it into spirit and flesh. Returning isn't a poetic gesture. It's a work that involves memory, truth, and practice. Memory to capture the moments when God visited us without spectacle, hidden behind the scenes of everyday life. Truth to admit where we've lost ourselves, what agreements we made out of fatigue, what distractions became pocket idols, what wounds we've nourished with elegant explanations. Practice to rebuild the house. 10 minutes of silence that, repeated, reteach us to listen. A request for forgiveness that breathes life back into a relationship. A Eucharist welcomed not out of obligation, but as a table where love first offers itself anew. A weekly rosary that, with the rhythm of each bead, relearns how to endure. Without this foundation, the phrase first love is perfume without a vase. With this foundation, it becomes a root. You might say, but I've tried to go back so many times. I understand. There's a part of us that gets used to the dust and is startled when the light reveals what needs to be cleaned. But first love isn't an emotion we force. It's an encounter we return to through small, insistent choices. It's like relearning an instrument. The fingers are stiff, the ear is forgotten, but the music is there, waiting. And with each attempt, the hands remember, the ear reopens, the melody reappears. The same happens here. Discipline reopens the house to visitors. The visit rekindles the flame sustains the discipline. When this cycle takes hold, transformation ceases to be a vague promise and gains a concrete timetable. Today, tomorrow, the day after, a possible step toward the essential. This principle also sheds light on the questions that troubled us about the 7 messages. If the secret is not a riddle for the mind, Everything that inflamed empty curiosity loses its hypnotic power. What matters is not to spectacularize content. It is to prepare the heart to welcome what is given in its own time without it becoming a source of contention. The responsible hypotheses we organize, conversion, family, church, and world, cease to be categories and become paths. And first love is the flame that unifies everything. Without it, conversion becomes moralism, family becomes a claustrophobic refuge, church and world become a field of exhausted militancy. With it, confession is reunion, the Eucharist is home, forgiveness is office, peace is work, fasting is offering, reparation is caring for the wounds that ache in us all. The impact is not just intimate, it is communal. Lit hearts illuminate entire environments. There's a subtlety here that I don't want to rush. Returning to our first love doesn't spare us trials. It gives us the structure to weather them. The storm may continue. What changes is the internal architecture. Instead of glass walls, foundations. Instead of impulsive reactions, long breaths. Instead of high-sounding declarations, consistent gestures. Inner peace, which once seemed a distant promise, becomes muscle, and this muscle sustains. Hope when the news weighs heavy, sustains charity when mood falters, sustains fidelity when the will wants to negotiate. It is in this environment that the voices among the stones cease to sound like enigmatic whispers and become loving reminders of the essential, always old and always new. Perhaps, at this point, someone feels the old impatience rearing its head. Okay, but what about the dates and the details, and what comes next? I respond with the question that has silently guided this entire journey. What does this calling ask of us now? If the heart has understood, not everything needs to be clear for life to move forward. The most decisive hidden truth does not reside in the calendar. It resides in today's decision. The rest will come when it can be a blessing, not a burden. And when it comes, it will find us not with our arms crossed, but with our hands in the dough, praying with our hearts, reconciling with our names and surnames, discreetly supporting those who serve, repairing where charity has been denied, offering fasting as if adding good wood to the right fire. This is how the map becomes a road without losing its mystery, and how the promise does not fall into the frustration of immediacy. There is also a gain in freedom when we accept this principle. The mind is emptied of the heroism of knowing it. All in the heart is filled with the courage to live well what I already know. Comparisons with the path of others lose strength. The internal stage dismantles, the internal audience disperses, and what remains is the home, the one where God feels comfortable entering without knocking. When this happens, language itself changes. We speak less to convince, more to witness, less to shine, more to serve. And the authority that arises from this is impossible to manufacture. It comes from the fruits, which arrive in their own time and don't require a megaphone. What was theory begins to have a smell, taste, texture. And because it has texture, it can be offered to those who are hungry, without fear of it being foam. I wish you could remember this image. First love as a low, steady, flickering flame. It's not a campfire. It's a household lamp. It doesn't blind, it lights the way. It doesn't burn the hand, it warms the heart. It doesn't draw attention to itself, it reveals what's around. If this flame is lit, waiting doesn't make us despair. Delays don't sour us, silences don't scandalize us. We learn to walk in the cadence of grace, which knows exactly when to speak and when to remain silent, when to expose and when to protect, when to advance and when to retreat. And little by little, the promise that seemed distant becomes habit, and the habit becomes a second skin, and the second skin becomes peace. It's with this lit lamp that I want to look ahead with you, Because if everything we've talked about makes sense, then the next step isn't collecting more information, it's organizing our lives so that this flame doesn't go out. There are 7 spiritual lines that have accompanied us since the beginning, like a discrete chorus: penance, conversion, time of grace, prayer, family, church, trials. And there's a concrete possible way to weave them into daily life without losing your breath or falling into guilt. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject. If you're interested, in the next video we'll explore how to live these 7 spiritual lines in daily life, step by step. If this message resonated with you, write in the comments. I want to hear the voices among the stones, and tell me which of the 3 axes, conversion, family, church, and world, you'd like me to explore first. Your comment will guide the next episode. If you've made it this far, thank you for walking with me on this journey. You can feel when the conversation finds its place and feels good. If this content helped you rediscover the essentials, subscribe to the channel to continue receiving materials that sustain your faith in your daily life without rushing or noise. And tell me in the comments that you stayed until the end, writing, "I'm with you until the end." This helps me understand that this path made sense to you. If our exchange opened a window on your inner self, please leave a like. It's a simple sign that this message has found a home and encourages me to keep this journey alive. There's a video here that complements this topic. Click and continue with me there.